Man, I really did not expect to be saying this so soon, but as you saw in the title and thumbnail, in just 3 months and some change, I can safely say I'm done playing Warframe, the game that I was so hyped on getting into toward the end of 2024, and here I am already calling it quits. Now, before I even start, I already know that if this video finds any hardcore Warframe fans out there, then it's going to get mass downvoted, and honestly, I don't really care. I just wanted to vent and rant about what ultimately led me to quitting the game so early. Keep in mind, this is all based on my own experience. The issues I had are 100% subjective. There's just certain traits about Warframe that honestly, I liked at the start, and a lot of things I want to talk about, I liked them early on, but it just didn't stick with me in the end. Also, this is going to be mostly unscripted. Most of my rant videos are, and apart from the occasional edit to cut out pauses, I haven't really planned out any of what I'm about to say, but I have a good idea of what I'm going to say because I've agonized over it for about a week or so. And I'll try to keep it to three main categories, that being core gameplay, the progression system, and the enemy AI. Also, since this is more ranty than like me critiquing the game, I'm just gonna throw up some random footage in the background. Usually I look through all my footage for example clips of what I'm talking about, but I'm just lazy. I made a different type of video like this months ago, so I'll link that in the description if you want that video like this, but to the point and without me constantly repeating myself and stuff like that. But yeah, let's get into it. So if you can take away one thing from this video, just know that my reason for ultimately quitting Warframe is that I feel like there's not a lot of skill involved, and I'll get into what I mean by that over the course of the video. But to simplify it, the game prioritizes your time commitment over skill in like 9 out of 10 cases. And when I realized this, the game for me just got super stale and routine. We'll start with the core gameplay, which is the biggest facilitator of this issue in my opinion. When I play Warframe, I think mostly of close range and melee focused combat, but the shooting mechanics just are not satisfying enough as a counterpart to that. Many shooters require precise aiming, recoil control, and things like tactical positioning. Warframe, however, does not require any of this. Weapons often have high fire rates and large magazines, and they don't have any real penalties for missing shots. Headshots can be beneficial in some cases and on certain enemies, but the game rarely punishes inaccuracies since enemies have large health pools and they die quickly regardless. The lack of like a cover system or something, or the need for precise aiming reduces the skill ceiling drastically, at least in my opinion. And yes, I do understand the game leans heavily into PvE, but Souls games have insanely high skill ceilings and are mostly experienced PvE as well, so I don't buy that excuse. Something else that I know will definitely piss off a few people is how overpowered and therefore easy the special abilities are on a lot of the frames that makes Warframe just much more casual. Now I'm playing with Dante, as you can see. He was actually gifted to me, but this is still a good example of what I mean. Dante's fourth ability of Overshield is so easy to use. I can take a complete newbie and be like, hey man, all you gotta do is every now and again use your second ability twice and then the ultimate ability or the fourth ability, and we're basically unstoppable. You don't have to do nothing else. Just run around and look for these little purple cubes and recharge our shield now and again, and you're good. I would say most frames in the game have abilities that remove the need for skill-based engagement just as a whole. Instead of using cover, like I said, aiming or strategizing, players can press a single button to kill enemies, crowd control an entire area, or make themselves virtually invincible. And it wouldn't be such a big deal if I felt like that most boss fights at the end of a star chart path were difficult or challenging in some way, but they're just not if you have the proper upgrades and abilities. And you know what, before I ramble about the gameplay for 10 more minutes, I'll just wrap it up by saying Warframe has no strategy to approaching missions at all. I don't want some like Siege or Valorant level of team strategy, but things like defense and survival missions should require positioning, team coordination, resource management, etc. Instead, if you just bring a kitted frame and spam abilities, you can clear waves effectively with no difficulty. And just so I can get ahead of this one here, I know that people like to say that grinding and farming to get that maxed out equipment is a type of skill in and of itself, but that argument falls apart when you consider the fact that players can just purchase their way to these same upgraded frames and weapons, and pulling out your wallet isn't a skill gap also. So I'm just not convinced. I just want to make it very clear right now. Dedication does not equate to skill. I can dedicate myself to, say, golf and have lessons Monday through Friday from some of the best PGA golfers in the world. That doesn't mean I'll suddenly become a professional golfer myself. So just to make it clear, those are very two different things. Oh, and also before I forget, This is a little side issue or a complaint on my part, but your MR or mastery rank literally means nothing and it can be kind of deceiving. For example, a player can reach MR 30 by leveling up weapons and frames, even if they barely play the game at a high level. I'm actually a perfect example for this, honestly. I tried to craft as many weapons and try as many different frames as I could, so I was constantly ranking up my MR, even though I was just grinding the same missions and not really progressing. You would see me at like MR10 and then other players at MR10, and like the thought would be that they were pay to win players because we were leagues apart in terms of our power level. I'm basically saying that MR outside of loot requirements doesn't give you an indication of how good someone might be. But next is the progression system, and I already made a video on this topic, so I'll link that one as well. But the whole grinding instead of learning mentality that you need to adapt significantly reduces and slows down your understanding of how to play Warframe. Let me put it like this. New players struggling in a mission won't necessarily need to get better by learning the mechanics. They just need to farm better weapons and mods, which eventually will make the game easier without having them actually become better. This is something that is talked about literally everywhere, and even in my comments. I see people say things like, I have 500 hours and I still feel like I don't fully understand the game. For me, at 500 hours, I should be able to play a PvE game on max difficulty, blindfolded with one hand behind my back. And to still feel lost hundreds of hours into a game is a sign that it doesn't force you to get better. It just kind of expects that to happen through repetition, and that's not a very effective strategy in my opinion. But the nail in the coffin, and I would say a big reason as to why I quit Warframe, is the enemy AI being so bad it's not even funny. The AI in Warframe is extremely simplistic. Most enemies just run at the player or stand in one place waiting to be killed, and since enemies don't use advanced tactics or react intelligently, fights feel more like shooting galleries like COD Zombies or, say, Dead Rising, rather than testing how good or efficient a player actually is. I still love the enemy variety, and I always will. I can't fault Warframe for trying to throw different attacks at a player, but let's be honest, you hardly recognize any of the specific enemies you're fighting unless they're the Eximus units, mostly because it pops up on the screen. I'm not saying you won't recognize that they attack differently, but you won't see it make much of an impact on you outside of the occasional, again, Eximus or the Bursa, like those big robots that scale higher than other enemies. The difficulty from enemies come from health and damage pools rather than like strategic behavior. And don't even get me started on the boss fights. Did I mention this already? I'll do it again because I can't remember, but boss fights are pointless because they take place in a huge arena against enemies that do the exact same thing grunt enemies do. Aside from the occasional teleporting or the invisibility trait that they might have, the boss fights are nothing more than gateways to better loot, and that's it. I mean, why do you think there are drop rates for good loot in each boss fight instead of constant loot every time you face them? They're not meant to be a test of skill or teamwork or anything like that. Also, infinite revives don't help how low difficulty everything feels. Even if the boss fight is actually tough for once, you just revive until you win the battle of attrition. So it's like a sort of succeed now or succeed later kind of thing. Rarely in Warframe are you ever penalized for fighting above your weight class if you have even one teammate helping you in a fight. But I already talked about this in another video about how teaming with other players makes the game so easy that your only reason to further engage with it is the social aspect. But I'm gonna stop complaining. I think you get the gist of it. All of these factors contribute to Warframe being at least in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, a low skill game. And while it's fun and rewarding in a power fantasy sense, it doesn't challenge the player in a way that like tactical or some action games do. If you're looking for a game where you can chill out with the boys and not really have too much resistance, then I think Warframe is a perfect game for that. It gives off strong like Saturday night with the family vibes, and that's not a bad thing entirely. For me, I was just expecting more out of it from the stance of like the better you are, the more it could be showcased. But ultimately, that's just not the type of game that Warframe is.